Dr. Jazz.
So
Slovenia.
Dr.
yeah,
Jazz.
you ever played here? Former Yugoslavia, probably with Steve Coleman, I guess.
I've been into Ljubljana,
Yeah.
Slovenia. I've been to Ljubljana and Macedonia and
Oh yeah, Skopje. Yeah.
Sarajevo.
Yeah, Bosnia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
long time. I've been Ljubljana was a long time ago. I went once with Steve Coleman and once with Jerry Allen.
Oh wow. Okay. Beautiful.
That's Slovenia, right?
Yeah.
Ljubljana.
Yeah, Ljubljana, the capital.
Ljubljana, Slovenia.
Yeah.
I played there twice. Once with Steve Coleman, once with Jerry Allen.
Ah, beautiful. Yeah, we have to bring you again, man.
In the 1980s.
Wow. Yeah.
1980s with Steve, 1990s with Jerry.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. It's like, but Graham, I want to start this conversation with you know
a long time. Yeah, I miss Europe. I don't come to Europe much. I don't get too many invitations. Europe thing. Huh?
How come?
Yeah, no. I'm sorry?
How come you don't come to Europe a lot? I mean, or more?
Well, last time I was in Europe, I was touring with Vijay Iyer.
Oh yeah,
that was the last time I was really touring in Europe. Yeah, last time I really toured in Europe. Then I was in Portugal last year in Portugal.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was not really for a tour. That was for a recording for a friend of mine. But before that, I hadn't been in Europe since I was touring with Vijay.
Okay.
And we didn't come to East. We came to Poland. We played in Poland a few times, but that was the only place in East Europe that we played.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Same. Hope to see you soon live again in Europe, man. I mean, would be nice.
Yeah. I'd love to come. You know, I'm aware that a lot of things in Europe and in the whole world are changing because of this Russia, Ukraine, you know, situations are pretty, you know, and then the COVID and
the whole
crazy situations, but we're still here. We're still here. So
we keep on pushing. Yeah. But
keep pushing. Keep playing. Keep playing it. Keep making the music. Keep making the donuts.
You know, I wanted to ask you. I listened today to Echolocation, and I really dig it. And I wanted to ask you, where does your love? Yeah, I really love it. I mean, where does your love for electronic music actually come from? I mean, I know you've done so many records in the 90s. I have like 6 or 7 of your records, and they're all connected with movements in the, you know, beat world and what was happening. But where does this initial love come from?
Well, where do I begin here with my interest and my love for electronics? Let me see. Where do I start here? Oh, well, I'm looking at my phone. Yeah, okay, I have enough energy. Yeah, we can talk for a while. If we get cut off, then I have to go to my iPad, which probably has more energy.
Okay.
Yeah, so my interest and my love for electronics, where did it start? Probably from listening to Miles. You know, I met Miles Davis in '74.
Oh, man, are you serious? Wow.
I saw him play live.
Beautiful.
I saw him play in '74, '75. Probably several times in '74, in '75, probably several times. I saw him play his last gig in '75 in Central Park before he retired for 5 years. The last gig that he played in Central Park, I was there.
Wow.
And yeah, I met him in '74. That's probably where the interest, but actually it probably started before then. I mean, my interest in actually my first interest in using effects and things probably came from listening to Sly Stone, and that was before I even listened to Miles.
Sure.
You know, I was, when I was 11, 12, 13, Sly Stone was like the rage. Sly and the Family Stone. And he had the record Everyday People. The album was called Everyday People, or the album was called Stand. Stand,
yeah.
Stand.
Yeah.
When that record came out, I remember when it came out, my brother had the record and I listened to it and it blew my mind. And that's probably where it started. Probably started there with the use of effects. Then from there, listening to Miles and checking out Miles. Then I had an interest in using effects in electronics and listening a lot to, in New York, you have a radio station, WKCR, Columbia University. And they had a show called Transfigured Night, where they did a lot of experimental music, Brian Eno and musique concrète and all this stuff. And I was like, really? Then when I went to Queens College in New York, and Bob Moog was teaching a class there. Bob Moog had Moog, the Moog synthesizer guy.
Mm-hmm.
I had a class in Queens College, and I went to Queens College because I knew he was teaching this class, but I never got to take the class. For some reason, I never took the class. Years later, I met Bob Moog in the Moog Fest. I played at the Moog Fest, and I met him. And I told him that story. I said, man, I came to Queens College because of you, but I never took your class. And he got a big kick of it. By then, I had a Moog synthesizer, and that needed a little bit of work. And he said, yeah, I can fix your synthesizer for you. Send it to me. Okay, so flash forward to 1982 or 83. I met a colleague of mine, Bruno D'Almeida. Bruno D'Almeida was a guitarist from Lisbon. And we had a duo where we were doing a lot of experimental stuff with electronics, sampling. That was before they even had samplers.
Yeah.
84.
Yeah, that's early. Yeah.
Before they had samplers, we were recording a lot of stuff on tape, manipulating a lot of stuff with tape machines, getting distortion and cutting things on tape and using sequencers. And just, I was reading we were checking out a lot of music and art and music, the Dada and all this stuff. So that's, all that stuff, the combination of all that stuff, that's how I got into it. In the 90s, in the 80s, in the later 80s, Mark Gilmore, I don't know if you know who Mark Gilmore is. Mark Gilmore's the brother of David Gilmore. And he hit me to the whole drum and bass thing. And okay, so I got into the drum and bass. I did a certain amount of projects with him in London. He was living in London. I was living in Paris. I moved to Paris because I was interested in African music. So I moved there in 1990, 91, 92, 93, up until about 2000, 2001. I was going to London working with Mark, doing a lot of these drum and bass tracks. And then you had what they called electronica.
Yeah.
The whole electronica movement that started, that was very big in Europe and the US. And I got involved in that. I had several bands and projects where I used DJs. I was always, okay, so from the time I got with Steve Coleman, even before I got with Five Elements, I was interested in using effects with the horn. So I was using hardware effects through a microphone or through through a mic or through a contact mic, or what do you call it?
Like those pinch-on mics, kind of. Yeah.
Well, even before they had those, they had these little contact things. They weren't really exactly microphones. They were pickups, like a pickup.
Yeah. Okay.
If you listen to the first 5 Elements record, you can hear me playing. I'm using a pickup. I'm playing with it. I'm playing with effects, and that was 1987, 86.
Yeah, modern
so from that time. Yeah, from that time, I was always, and that came from Miles, from listening to John Hassel, listening to Miles, learning how to use the effects with the horn. But I was always, during the same time, I was always fascinated with synthesizers, with sequencers, with synthesis, with tape, with all the things that you could do, listening to Hendrix, listening to all this stuff. A lot of stuff I was listening to the radio, like I said, WKCR had a couple of shows where they were playing a lot of electronic music, a lot of cut up music and music. Then I got turned on to Pierre Henry and music concrete. I was already aware of Stockhausen. My father had a record of Stockhausen. Chick Corea, I think, gave my father a Stockhausen record to listen to.
How cool, man.
So when I was a kid, we had this Stockhausen record, and I would listen to it, and I was totally fascinated.
Yeah. It's like
So I was, so you have to understand, from the time I was 14, 13, I was interested in that music. I was playing jazz, I was learning jazz, and I was learning all this stuff, and I was playing bebop and all this stuff. But I always knew that what I wanted to do when I started my projects was to work with electronics and to work to experiment with sounds. I was always fascinated with experimenting with sounds, electronic and acoustic. When I got with Steve Coleman, then I was totally into all this layering of rhythms and African, West African music. And that's how I wound up in Paris. I wound up in Paris because, Steve and I were going to the library and taking out African records on African music, and at the same time taking scores of classical music of Bartok and Stravinsky, Bartok, and all this stuff. We were studying all this stuff. I mean, we would go to the library, get the records, and take the scores and analyze the scores and all this stuff. So I was way into this stuff when I was in my 20s. So I wasn't a normal jazz musician, I really wasn't from the beginning. I wasn't, because, growing up in New York and being around my father. I mean, my father at different times had musicians who were working with electronics. I mean, there was a keyboard player named Cedric Lawson who played with one of my father's groups in the early 1970s. And he used to run his Fender Rhodes through a ring modulator.
Oh, yeah.
1972. This is like 1972. So I was checking that out. And then he played with Miles. Cedric wound up playing with Miles. He's on that record, Get Up With It, I think. So Cedric was also very listening to Cedric and checking him out. Cedric Lawson is still around, I believe. He's somewhere in Pennsylvania. He was a revolutionary musician. Stuff with keyboards, with manipulating, splitting tones with the ring modulator and stuff like that. So
it's amazing how you evolved. What I think the first record I bought of yours was like when I started with jazz was Transition, which is like 90 mid 90s, and you know, and
Mid-90s, yeah.
yeah, and then when I follow you now and I listen to this one that you did with Submerged, it's just like, man, you really.
But even I did before I did the record with Submerged, there's 8 records that I did with DJ Hardedge that you should check out.
Okay.
You go to DJ Hardedge. Just look at Graham Haynes, DJ Hardedge.
Okay,
on
this
YouTube.
one I don't know. Okay, cool.
There's 8 records that we made.
Wow. Okay.
8 records of just cornet and electronics.
Ooh. Okay.
Cornet and DJ. That was before the Submerged.
Okay.
That was before Submerged, and then that was before. Okay, so Submerged. I met. What's his name? This is Submerged. You just Submerged. What his actual name escapes me. But I met him through working with Bill Laswell. And I started working with Laswell, I don't know, in the 90s. In the early 2000s, I started with Bill Laswell. And then that was also another delve into electronics and stuff. And he was doing...
How did you meet Bill?
So yeah, if you check
actually, I have those records with Bill. You know, how did you hook up with Bill? Actually,
yeah. So that's how I met Submerged. Kurt
Gluck. Kurt Gluck. Yeah.
Kurt Gluck. I met Kurt through Laswell, but then I lost contact with him. We played one gig together, and then I never saw him again.
Oh, well.
The record that I did with him, record I did with Submerged was really Philip. I forget Philip's last name. The guy who had the actual label.
Oh, okay.
He had the label that he approached me and said, "Look, I want to do a record with you." And it was not with Submerged. It was with what's his name, Mick Harris in London. Mick Harris, I think is his name. Mick. I believe that's it. But then he wound up not doing it. So they said, "Look, Mick is not going to do it, but Kurt agreed to do it." So when we did that record, when I did that record with Kurt, that was right when I was starting to move to Brazil. So the way we did that record was, he made the tracks and sent it to me. I was here in Brazil. I went into studio here with my iPad. So like now, instead of using hardware, because
it's easier,
up until from the beginning up until about 2013 or so, I was working with hardware.
Yeah, sure.
But then somebody hit me to the software that I could use in the iPad. I wouldn't have to carry all this stuff. So all my most of my arsenal is in apps that I'm using in my iPad.
Yeah, it's so much easier. So much easier. Yeah.
So much easier. It's cleaner. You can't do the same things that you can do with the hardware, but you can do things that you can't do with the hardware. So
exactly.
It's a combination.
Yeah.
Like I miss in some ways I miss the hardware. And you got to understand that when Miles and all those guys and during the rock era, the technology was different. It was bigger, it was bulkier, it was more cumbersome, but you could do things that you cannot do with digital. And I miss that. But at the same time, with the digital, you can do things that you can't do with the old school analog stuff. So it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off.
Yeah, I love the analog stuff, when you have like a digital delay and you press something and, it comes like a 11/8 pattern you didn't want to do. And it's like, man, what is this? Or it's like, I love that with the analog stuff, this unpredictability actually.
Yeah, and there's all kind of feedback.
Yeah.
And then all kind of feedback loops and white noise and all kinds of stuff you can get with digital. It kind of, after a certain point, it just clips. It clips signal. It's an ugly sound.
Yeah.
In the analog, of course, it's an analog. It's an organic sound.
Yeah.
Definitely. So
yeah. But I wanted to. How did you hook up with Laswell? Actually, since you mentioned him. When does your story begin?
Let me see. First time I met Laswell was in Finland when Laswell was working with Last Exit.
Oh yeah.
I was doing I was playing in Tampere in Finland with Steve Coleman, Five Elements, and we played the same festival with Last Exit. That was the first time I saw Laswell, and we met very briefly in an elevator in your hotel, very briefly. But I didn't stay in contact with him. I wasn't in touch with him. And then years later, I don't know how Laswell got my name. I think it was through a project. It might have been Laswell was working with Henry Threadgill, and my name came up. And then Laswell called me to play on some tracks, and that would have been the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I started working with Laswell, and then we did a record with Carl Berger called Opera Zone, which Alan Douglas produced. And that's really when I first started working with Bill, with the Opera Zone record.
Yeah.
That was Alan Douglas' project that they did at Laswell Studio. And then from there, Bill just started calling me for gigs and for recordings. And then we started a relationship that lasted up until recently. And I have to call Bill. He hasn't been well, but still working and doing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys done so much.
We worked for a long time.
Yeah,
we worked for a number of years. We went to a lot of different countries, Japan and Europe, and we did a lot of recordings. I did a Pharoah Sanders record.
Yeah, I love that one, man. That's a beautiful one.
And, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I did all this project with Bill.
Yeah. But Graham, I wanted to ask you, like when you mentioned Steve Coleman many times, and you guys kind of created something unique, with the M bass and the Five Elements kind of working together. Like, when did you meet Steve for the first time, and how does your story begin? Like, when was that?
Yeah, that was interesting. I met Steve the first time in 1978 or late 78 or 79.
Wow, already. Wow.
And it was in Washington Square Park. In Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village, they used to have jam sessions in the park.
Wow.
And I had my horn, and those guys were jamming, Steve and a bunch of saxophone players and rhythm section playing in the park, and that's where I met Steve. And he had just come to New York. He was playing at that time with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis Orchestra.
Yeah.
But he had just come to New York, and he was kind of homeless, kind of. He was living in a bunch of different places, and he had this car that he drove from Chicago. And he didn't, New York, to have a car and live in New York City is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And I was living in Queens. And in Queens, it's much easier to have a car and to park the car. And I lived in a house where there was a car garage. So Steve said, well, look, man, I have this car. Can I leave my car in your garage sometime? So I said, yeah, sure. So he brought his car and he left it in my garage. And that's how we started really hanging out. We started, at the time I met Steve, I was coming through an experience where I was still in college. I wasn't playing in clubs because I was in this Christian movement. So I had stopped playing in nightclubs. I was only playing in the church.
Oh, wow.
I was playing in the evangelical church and trying to get a degree in music at the same time. But I wasn't playing in any clubs. And so that's how, when I met Steve in Washington Square Park, at that time, I wasn't going to clubs. I had stopped for a period of 3 years. I was just playing in the church and playing in school. But I happened to be in Washington Square Park. And that's how, when we met, I met with him and started hanging out with him, and he kind of encouraged me. He said, "Look, man, if you want to play this music, you have to. The music is in the clubs. This is I was, the whole evangelical thing was like they're playing in places that serve alcohol and all this stuff. It's like kind of forbidden.
Yeah.
So Steve kind of brought me out of that, and then I started playing in clubs. I started hanging out in jam sessions in Harlem with him, playing all over in Harlem in the early 1980s, and in Brooklyn and in Queens. And then he brought me to Chicago, and I met Von Freeman. And then he and I, the thing with Steve was that he wanted to jam all the time. He wanted to play with everybody. He wanted to play at all the jam sessions all the time. So we went to all the jam sessions in New York, jam sessions in Chicago. And then we decided to make this trip from Chicago to New Orleans and stop along the way in between Mississippi and Memphis, Tennessee. And we hitchhiked part of the way, just me and him, just hitchhiking from Chicago to New Orleans and stopping along the way at all these juke joints. And we played with all these blues music. Because Steve and I, we played with Junior Wells and Buddy Guy at the Checkerboard Lounge and clubs. And, it was really, really, running around and playing around the country with him was really fascinating, meeting musicians of all kinds. That was a different time, That was a time when you still had juke joints, and that was the end of the disco era.
Yeah.
And the beginning of the hardcore. It was before the DJ culture really caught on. So you still had a lot of live music clubs. It was before the DJs took over the whole club scene. So, you can imagine going from Chicago, Tennessee, Mississippi, Missouri, New Orleans, and then coming through, we came back through Alabama, Georgia, just me and him. We didn't have any gigs. We didn't have any band. It was just me and him.
Wow.
We had talked about forming a band. And when we got back to New York, then we formed Five Elements. Five Elements, at that time in New York, you had all these guys playing on the street. You had bands playing on the street. And there was a great musician who's still around, saxophone player named George Braith, who created something called Braithophone.
Yeah.
George Braith had this band. It was an incredible band that used to play certain locations in the middle of Midtown Manhattan on the street with his band. And he had two guys, Mark Johnson and Billy Johnson. He had this really tight rhythm section. And Steve and I used to jam with those guys. And then so we started Five Elements. Was started originally from musicians that we met playing on the street and musicians that we met in Harlem at a club called the Lickety Split on 137th Street, 7th Avenue. And we put these musicians together, and Steve had certain ideas. Steve had been playing with Doug Hammond Trio. Doug Hammond showed him these rhythmic ideas and rhythmic things that you do with the drum. And it was totally revolutionary. I mean, nobody was doing, at the time we formed Five Elements, musicians were not playing in 5/8 and 7/8 and 7/4 and 5/4 and all these things. And Steve was really open to all that stuff. And like I said, he and I were going to the library and taking scores of Bartók and analyzing. We were reading a lot about Bartók and how he was creating all this music with folk rhythms that he learned from East Europe and from Turkey and all this stuff. And we were fascinated with all the 15, 16, really crazy time signatures, all the shit, and all the different things he was doing with intervals and melodies and all these crazy things. Bartók was really, Bartók was kind of our guru for Five Elements, you know. He was our guru. Five Elements was really formed. It was combination of Bartok, James Brown, and Charlie Parker and Max Roach.
You know, that's a nice dough, yeah.
Yeah, if you can fathom that combination, you know, because Steve was way into Charlie Parker, and I'm talking about obscure Charlie Parker. I'm not talking about the records that everybody knew.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the very obscure jam sessions that he played, and then all these things, these rhythmic things that Max Roach was doing, combined with the things that he learned from Doug Hammond, because Doug Hammond was way into Max Roach and Roy Haynes, and all the great drummers who were doing breaking beats. You know, we were doing breakbeat before there was breakbeat. I mean, breakbeat existed, but the whole idea of breakbeat really also, you know, came out of James Brown, the funky drummer, and Clyde Stubblefield and all this stuff. We were transcribing. We were trying, you know, and at the same time we were studying Bartok. We were also studying James Brown and Louis Armstrong, Hot 5, Hot 7, and Baby Dodds and all this stuff. I mean, there's a relationship there. Yeah. There's a relationship with what Max Roach was doing with Charlie Parker is a strong relationship with what Clyde Stubblefield was doing with James Brown, and what Baby Dodds was doing with Louis Armstrong at a Hot 5 at Hot 7. So we're taking all these elements and analyzing, I mean, really putting the shit under a microscope and figuring this stuff and breaking it down and putting it together. And that was Five Elements. Yeah. And we formed a band, and Steve got the recording with first with JMT.
Yeah.
And we did this. We did this records on JMT, and then we came to Europe in '86. It was my first time in Europe. It was 1986.
How was that like?
85 or '86, I forget.
How was the group accepted in Europe?
Oh, I remember, man. That was right after the Chernobyl incident. I'll never forget.
Oh,
that was right after the Chernobyl. We came to Europe 2 weeks after the Chernobyl explosion.
Oof.
We had a tour in Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and everybody was telling us, "Don't eat this, don't eat that, don't drink this, don't drink the water, don't drink." You know, it was 2 weeks after Chernobyl, if you can believe it. But we did a tour. The tour was a success, and then we did more tours after that. And at that time, it was really playing around in Europe. The people loved the music, but I think the Europeans could understand it because they understood these odd time signatures, because, you know, you have all this stuff in Austria and Switzerland and different places. So they understood it. I mean, they understood it from their point of view. But then the funk element, you know, I mean, at the same time we were doing Five Elements, you also had Joe Bowie and Defunct.
Yeah.
And then you also had, so we were also taking that funk element. And at the same time, there was a lot of new wave. We were checking out all this new wave stuff, funk and new wave, and, you know, all this shit was happening. New York was going through transition of experimentation. It was the beginning of the new wave and all this stuff. And then after, you had Ronald Shannon Jackson, Decoding Society, and we were they kind of put us in the same group with, like, kind of, we're in between Decoding Society and Defunct. We were kind of taking some elements from them, but because of all the stuff we were studying, it was actually a little bit different, you know. it was great. And I worked with Steve, worked with Five Elements. I was with Five Elements for a number of years, and then I decided I want to start my own thing.
Yeah.
And then I started my own band in 87, 88. And then I did 2 records for Muse Records. In 1990, I moved to Paris.
What Time It Be is the first one, right?
What Time It Be is my first record.
Is the first one, right?
Then I did a second record called. Then I did a second one that's called Nocturne Parisien.
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
And then, and then from being in Paris, I got hooked up with French Polygram. I did 3 records with them.
Yeah.
By that time, I was moving back to New York. By that time, I was ready to move back to New York, and then that's I was doing those recordings, and then that's when I started. I had already Mark Gilmore's somebody. My first band had Mark Gilmore on drums. I had 2 drummers, and Mark Gilmore played drums and Chapman stick, and then his brother David Gilmore actually played bass in my band.
Really? Oh wow, that's cool.
I had a problem. I had a problem with my bass player. Dave Gilmore played bass on a couple of records. And then so I had already been playing with Mark Gilmore. And then he was the one that hit me to drum and bass.
Okay.
And then so from that time, in the mid-90s, I started doing projects with him. And that led me into drum and bass, going to London, that whole scene.
Yeah. So many guys now, like within the creative jazz scene, and it's like a huge archive is being created. I mean, I love that, it's to support the music, and I think it's a nice thing. So
wow, that's good.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah, I love that.
That's cool.
But
the whole this is one of the great things about the new technology. I mean, when the COVID happened, and then when COVID started, and all these musicians were locked in their houses, and everybody was talking about doing live recordings and live gigs, I wasn't really into it, and I'm still not really into it. I mean, there's certain aspects of it that I like, depending on what kind of music, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah.
But this is one of the positive things I think about the use of the technology to do.
Absolutely.
You're in Slovenia, and I'm in
Brazil. That's fascinating.
I think this is one of the great aspects.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you one thing.
There's some things that they do with the technology that are not cool, but this is one of the cool things about it.
That's the one positive. Yeah. But when you did your projects, which were a lot of electronica based, you did a lot of stuff with Butch Morris and the Nubla Orchestra, and Bill Dixon. I love that project, Tapestries for Small Orchestra. And how did these stories with those guys begin, and how was it like working with them? I mean, these are some of the greats, I think.
I'm glad that you did your homework. I'm glad.
No, but I have those records actually. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because those guys, those were 2 people that are very dear to me, that play my instrument, but they were also great musical geniuses, not just on their instrument. But I mean, Dixon was a great composer, a great artist, a very great. He also experimented with sounds, as did Butch. And I think both of those guys. Okay, well, I'll start with Butch. I first of all, Butch Morris was a guy that we all thought was the coolest guy. I mean, Butch Morris and Oludara, with two cornet players.
I love it.
That were the coolest people. I mean, you want to talk about people with style. People with style that were very hip, who played my instrument. You know, Butch Morris and Oludara were the guys. You know, and of course Don Cherry. You know, when I moved to Paris, Don Cherry encouraged me a lot, and Don was a big fan. I mean, he was a very big encouragement, and I got to meet Don and know Don a little bit. But Butch and Olu were two guys. I just thought they were the coolest guys, and I first worked with Butch. David Murray had gotten in touch with me right before I moved to Paris and said, look, we're going to do this thing in the studio, and Butch is going to do this conduction in the studio. And that was my first time playing with Butch, but I had known Butch. I'd seen him around. I thought he was cool. That was my first time playing with Butch, was a conduction. It was actually, Butch Morris was called to do a pilot, to a score for a TV show called A Man Called Hawk. It was a TV series, and he did the score, and he did the music for a certain amount of series, and then they got someone else to do it. But this thing that we did in the studio was kind of a demo for the TV series. And that was my first time working with Butch. Then after that, we did 2 records on DIW with David Murray Big Band that Butch did the conduct. So that's how I started work. That was the beginning of my relationship with Butch. And then Butch and I used to, and then after we did the David Murray projects, and then Butch was doing his conduction things, but I wasn't working with him. But after I moved back to New York, Butch and I started hanging out a lot, just as friends. Not necessarily playing music or studying music, but just hanging out because he liked cigars and I liked cigars. So did Olu. So those are the 2 guys that I hung out with. You know, they were both into tobacco, cigars and cognac and stuff. So I was hanging out with Butch, and we were just hanging out as friends, and I wasn't working with him, but we were just talking about music and talking about ideas, and talking about, and then he started calling conductions, and I started playing in some of his conductions. And that was the beginning of my working relationship with Butch. And then I worked with Butch. I played in a certain number of conductions.
Yeah.
We did something with the artist David Hammonds in Madrid, which was a big art installation. And then I did several. I played at Village Vanguard with Butch, with a project he put together, a week at the Vanguard. And then I started working with Butch. Now, Bill Dixon, I first met Bill Dixon in Firth. I was at a jazz festival in Firth in Germany. I was playing with Bob Stewart, the tuba player, and Bill Dixon was playing with his group. And Bill Dixon listened to us, and he really admired my playing.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't really stay in contact with him. It wasn't until about 2007 or 2008 when Bill called me, and he remembered me from hearing me at Firth in I would have been around 96 or so. And he said, man, I really loved your sound when I heard you. So that started a relation with Bill. And then Bill really took a liking to me, and I was just learning about his music and art and his whole trajectory. And we did a certain number of projects, and then he got sick and he died. It was very sad. But he was planning a lot of, Bill was planning a lot of things, but he got sick and he died.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
But I was kind of starting a mentorship with Bill, which didn't last. Similar with Butch, even though I worked with Butch more, We worked a certain number of years. We've worked a lot with the New Blue Orchestra. We toured Europe and we did a recording, and then we played a lot at New Blue. There's a number of, I don't know how much of that stuff got recorded, but we played at New Blue over a number of years, every Monday. From around, I can't remember what years escaped me, 2008, maybe from 2007, 2006, up until Butch died. Butch died in 2013, I think.
Oh, yeah.
So I worked a lot with Butch. And I learned the conduction method. I learned the method from working with Butch. So now I do conduction.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I conducted the New Blue Orchestra. Yeah, I conducted the New Blue Orchestra several times. And then now I've been doing the conduction with different groups. I still have a conduction group here in Brazil. But and there's guys here in Brazil that are into conduction who I'm working with. And the conducted improvisation is something that's been existed for many years.
Yeah, sure.
But Butch Morris had a very detailed codified, and then there was a book that came out.
Yeah.
The conduction book is so I'm using the Butch Morris conduction. Some people are into the Walter Thompson sound painting, and some people, there's different people doing conduction from different ways. But I use the Butch Morris. I was a disciple of Butch Morris, and I learned conduction from him. So the conduction that I do is from his method, for the most part.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that I do, I like to think that everything that I'm doing is a continuum, So I'm doing stuff with conduction, but I still have ideas from Five Elements. I'm still in contact with Steve Coleman. He and I still talk about ideas, and now I'm working with orchestral music. I'm composing orchestral stuff, and at some point, I'm going to take all this stuff and I'm going to fuse it all together. All the electronic and all this stuff it's all one thing, it's all a part of a continuum. For me, that's how I see it,
Yeah. Are you planning, like, for this year or in the future, a new record by you, or as a band leader, or especially, do you still plan to do something like acoustically? I know you did like a record now on Intact with the piano player. What's Yuko Fujiyama? Which I love. That's free improv, more acoustic oriented stuff.
I did that, and then before that, I was playing with Vijay Iyer. We did the record on ECM.
Yeah, I love that one, man.
With Vijay, and then I toured with Vijay. We're talking about doing another project. Vijay and I are doing a duo project, which something will probably be in the future, maybe later in the year.
Beautiful.
But yeah, Yuko's a very interesting musician. I like her music very much. She's a great artist, and so she called me. I did that record on Intact.
Yeah.
I did 2 records for Yuko. And then I just was in New York in November, and she did a little residency at Roulette, which now she has a nonprofit organization, which I'm on the board of directors. And she's talking about doing more projects. So I like what she does, and I'm doing stuff with her at the same time, doing stuff with Vijay, and then I'm doing my own stuff. Right now, I'm in the middle of composing a requiem for orchestra and chorus, and that's something I started in 2020, and I'm almost finished composing it, but that's kind of like been my priority since 2020, writing this music for orchestra and chorus, requiem, which hopefully will be performed. It's sometime in 2023, 2024. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, fantastic. Nice. Looking forward to hear this stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Graham, just one question. Like you mentioned VJ. How did you connect with VJ? I mean, I know he played with Steve, obviously, but was it through Steve, or did you guys know each other somehow differently?
Yeah. Well, we knew each other from New York. There was a scene, you know, I mean, I started seeing Vijay around. He was doing also stuff with electronics. I was doing stuff with electronics, so that was also a meeting point.
Yeah.
Vijay and I, Steve, Vijay was working with Greg Tate and doing projects with him. And then I was also involved with some of those projects with Greg Tate projects. And, you know, he was just on the scene in New York.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we met up. It wasn't necessarily through Steve, but also through Steve, you know, through our contact with Steve. That's also kind of what led me working. But Vijay was on the scene in New York at the same time. We were both experimenting with different things. And yeah, that's kind of how. And then when he put his sextet together, he called me to play with his sextet. And then, yeah, we did those recordings, and then we toured in Europe and stuff.
Yeah.
Did some gigs in the States, toured in the States a little bit. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Cool. Great. Graham, I'll leave you be a nice Sunday then. So, like, I see you're enjoying yourself.
So that's kind of
yeah,
you know, that's kind of what that's kind of my history, more or less.
Yeah, you've done more.
Pretty much got everything there.
Yeah, Ed Blackwell is still there. You know, I love that stuff you did. So.
But yeah, the stuff I did. Yeah, that was another situation. You know, musicians. I got in contact with them, and then they called me to do stuff, and then they passed on. You know, Ed Blackwell asked me to join his band. We did a certain number of gigs, and then he got sick. But he was already sick by that time.
Yeah.
We were getting ready to do a Europe tour. I was living in Paris, and then I got a call that he passed away. We were just getting ready to do a tour, which was going to take us to Macedonia. We were going to do a tour that was going to take us to Macedonia and maybe Turkey and then some other parts in Europe, and then he died. And they actually were talking about doing the tour without him, with another drummer, but it never really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get with these musicians that they're in the end of their careers, but maybe that's some kind of I don't know. I look at, you know, Bill Dixon, at Blackwell, Butch Morris, these guys. I look at what I did with them. They were I was a part of their life. They were part of my life at a part where they were at the end, and it was kind of sad parting ways with them in that way, in those terms. But look at it like they were looking at me like, okay, well now you have to continue
passing the torch.
What I was passing the torch along. You know, Bill Dixon, at Blackwell, Butch Morris. You know, I also worked with Sonny Murray for a number of years when I was in Paris.
Really? I didn't know that. Wow.
With Sonny.
Wow, man.
Sonny Murray and Charlie Hayden. I worked with Charlie Hayden. It's another situation. The passing. George Russell. Well, George Russell was a brief period I worked with George. George started a sextet, and I worked with him.
Oh.
And that was another mentorship situation. I didn't work much with George, and then George continued with his big band. George Adams, the saxophone player.
Oh, really? Awesome. Wow.
All these guys, these guys, I work with them and then they left, but they in their way, they had their influence and they're just passing the torch along,
That's important.
passing the torch along.
Yeah.
Now I have to.
You have to continue.
I have to continue and then pass the torch along to the younger guys.
Definitely.
Teaching, maybe doing workshops and teaching. I've been wanting to come to Europe, and it's there's the politics behind all this stuff. It's always, I've been looking for teaching positions in the United States. I haven't been able to secure one.
Oh.
I've been looking for situations in Europe to do workshops and do classes, and it'll happen hopefully, but it hasn't happened yet to the extent that I would like it to happen.
Yeah.
But when it does, then that'll be a case of me passing the torch along to the younger guys,
Yeah.
Whether it's in Europe or US or Brazil or wherever it may be.
Yeah.
It's lessons that I learned from Butch and learned from David Murray and, from Sonny Murray and from my father and from all the great, guys came before me that I was able to work with. I worked with a lot of Steve Coleman and all these guys,
Yeah.
Just passing the torch.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's what that's about. And, I'm here in Brazil now and see what I can do here. There's some great musicians. There's unbelievable musicians here in Brazil. But at this point now, I'm really trying to concentrate and focus on basically studying all the things that I started to study when I was in college that I didn't finish. And I'm talking about counterpoint and orchestration and long form composition and all that stuff. All that stuff I started when I was 20 years old that I left because I never finished school. I never got a degree. I never finished school.
Yeah.
But now I have, I'm sitting here with all my books, my theory books, and now on YouTube you have all this information and all this stuff. So I'm this music, it never ends. That's also something that I learned from Steve and from Bill Dixon and from all these guys. It's like it never ends. You never arrive.
Yeah.
It's a never-ending quest for knowledge and procuring the knowledge, taking it, using it as you would use it, making it your own and finding your own voice and your own sound and creating your own things. Things I learned from those guys. And also Henry Threadgill, I have to put him in there too, I didn't work much with Henry, but he was somebody, another one of those guys.
Oh man, I love Henry.
Muhal Richard Abrams. I didn't work with Muhal, but I was around him a little bit. And all those guys were the great geniuses of our time.
Yeah.
Muhal, Henry and Butch, George Russell and Bill Dixon and and the list goes on and on. But I mean I got to be around and see those guys and talk with them, with Dada Leo Smith.
Oh yeah.
I did recording with him, did a couple of live projects with him. And those were the guys who taught me. And I'm just taking it and passing it on. Taking it in. As you take, Miles Davis said, music is like cooking. You take what you like eating. You take what you want, and what you don't want, you don't put on the plate.
True. That's so true.
Yeah. Just continue with your life and continue. I love music. I love art. I love different cultures and different learning about different cultures, and all this stuff is like it's seasoning, it's cooking. It's like take what you want, and what you don't want, you don't use. And then in the end, what you wind up is your own.
Yeah.
You wind up with your own taste, your own flavor, your own ingredient, your own
soup.
preparation, your own soup.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautifully put. Cool. Graham, man, thanks so much for sharing some of these thoughts. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for calling me, man. Thanks for calling me. I'm gonna check out at some point. I'm gonna sit down and check out what you've been doing.
I'll send you some links.
And I'm glad that I was able to add to your work, your trajectory, your work, and continue doing what you're doing, and you'll find hopefully you'll find younger musicians who are trying to stretch and trying to push the boundaries. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
That's what it's about.
Yeah, nicely put. Great.
Yeah.
Stay strong.
Yeah, man.
Stay strong, and I hope to catch you in Europe soon. So.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, man.
You too.
Okay.
Ciao.
Let's stay in touch with me.
Yeah, please.
Let me know what you're doing.
I will.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You have my contact. You just drop me a line every once in a while.
I will. Thank you so much.
And then we'll connect in Europe sometime.
Man, we'll grab a nice bottle of wine and talk. So.